Hello everybody, and welcome to another video of the lightweight Java game libraries and Java FX. And in this video I've got not a lot of time, so I'm just gonna rattle on with this because we've got quite a lot to do, because we need to do all the rendering, creating models, and the loading of the models into the renderer so that we can view objects inside our lightweight game library, or shall I say on our graphics display. Yep. So I'm going to go right ahead, and on my source I'm going to create a new package, and this package we're going to call renderer. And inside that package we're going to create a couple of things. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a model, because we want to have a model that we can display, and it is quite a short one here. So here we want to have a private int, and it's going to be a vertex array object ID, and we want to have another private int which is going to be a vertex count, because it's going to count the vertices of each which the model has, if I can type this properly, vertex count. And we're going to create our constructor, which is a public constructor, and it is model, and it's going to take in an integer, and then we're going to call it a VAO ID because it needs a VAO ID, and it's going to take an integer which is the vertex count. Right, then we need to set this dot VAO to this dot VAO ID to the VAO ID that's brought in by the function, and also this dot vertex count we're going to set to the vertex count brought in by this function. Okay, and that's basically that. And then we need to create a couple of getters. So we're going to go to source, and we're going to say generate getters and setters. We're going to select getters, generate, and then we've got get the VAO ID and get the vertex count. So we're going to save that. It's pretty much that for this class. So we are now going to create the more beefy one. So we're going to go and create another class inside our renderer, and we're going to call this loader. So this is going to be our loader, which is going to load our vertex array objects, or basically our models, into our vertex or vertex array objects, so that we can actually display it into the lightweight Java screen, the graphics display. So we're going to go ahead. It's quite a bit that we need to do here. So first of all, we're going to create two lists. They are private to this, and the first private list contains, well, they both contains integers. Oh, gone blank there. There we go, integer. This is going to be VAOs. That's new array list. List. It's going to be taken in integer. We need to call the function for that. And what we're going to do is we're just going to import, just hover over that, and import Java utils list and import array list Java utils. We're just going to copy this and paste it into there, because we're going to basically do the same for the VBOs. Okay. Yes. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to create a model, public model, and we're going to call this load to VAOs, because that's what we're going to load to the vertex object. It's going to take in a float array. Oh, can't spell this right now. Float array, there we go. And we're going to call it positions. Good. it's going to complain because we want to return statements. We're going to create an integer. It's going to be a VAOID. And now we're going to create call a function which we will create later, which is called create VAOs. Create VAO. And then we're going to store data in attribute list, which is also a function which we're going to call later, which is going to take going to be 0 and positions. These two functions we have not created yet. We will create them in a minute. Then we are going to also use another function which we will create in a minute, unbind VAOs. That's just gonna look like that. So these three functions we haven't created yet. Okay, and we then still need to return new model, and this is gonna have the VAO ID because that's the model that needs these, and the next one is going to be positions dot length, and it has to be divided by 3 because each triangle's got 3 points. So there we go. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create these other functions that we have in here, so that this becomes a little bit more clear. But before that, I'm just going to do another public function, and this is basically going to be void, and it's going to be cleanup. And basically what this is going to do, wrong bracket, what this is going to do is it's going to basically just clean up our lists. Okay, so we're going to run a for loop because we're going to iterate through our list. So the first list is a VAO, and we're going to VAOs. So that's basically how we iterate through a list. I do apologize, this has to be int. And then we're going to say GL30 for the VAOs dot, I don't know why I always put a comma behind the accent, just GL delete vertex array list, and we're going to take in the VAOs. Good. Now we have to make sure we're outside this loop. Clean up. Yeah, so we want to be here. We're going to do the same for the VBOs. So it's an integer VBO, and iterating through the VBOs list. This time I did it correctly. We're going to call GL15 here, and GL delete buffers, and we're going to take in the VBOs. So that's our cleanup method. It'll clean up after the renderer is closed. We will clean up our VBOs and VAOs so that we don't end up with having storage issues or issues with lots of yeah, well, you can imagine. If you load big models in, it'll have lots of data, and if we do not clean that data up, we're just going to end up with a seize. Everything will just freeze. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create this function called create VAOs. So it's a private int, and it is create VAOs. And basically we're going to take an integer, and of course it's the VAO ID, and we're going to set that to GL gen. Let me get gen buffers. Oh, what have I done wrong here? I did not call the number, sorry. GL15 dot, that's it, GL gen buffers. It is complaining because it wants to have a return statement, which we will do. Sorry, I made a mistake. This is the VAO ID is not GAL gen buffers. I beg your pardon. That's for the attribute list. This is GL vertex array. So we're gonna have to change that, and it's gonna be 30, of course. So let's do this correctly. 30 dot GL, and I gotta make sure I get this right. Yep, gen vertex arrays. That's correct because we're working with the vertex array objects, not the generate buffer objects. I always almost mix the two up. Vital mistake. And it is complaining because it wants to have a return statement. So VAOs, that's our list. We're going to add that buffer to our VAOs add, and in here we want a VAO ID. Oh, can't type VAO ID, which we've just created. So this VAO would be stored in the VAO list. Good. Then what we need to do is we need to bind the vertex arrays. So we're going to call GL30, and we are going to .gl bind vertex arrays, and that is of course going to be VAO ID, so that's all correct. And then we are going to return finally VAO ID. Pop. Yep, I have to finish my coding line, otherwise it won't work. So now we have created this VAO, which is the int VAO ID. This basically returns the VAO ID, so we set this int VAO ID. Now we got to go and do the rest of it so we can actually pass it through the model. So the next thing we need to do is work out and assign all the buffers. So we use the store data in attribute list for that. So now we need to go and create that. So this is a private void store data in attribute list. I hope I spelled that correctly. We will soon find out if I haven't. And this is going to take an integer, and it's of course the attribute number. Oh, didn't spell that right. Attribute number, and it's going to take in the float, which is the data. Okay. Nope, I should have put that in there and then done that. So we have our code all correctly laid out here. So here we're going to create an integer, and you got that right probably. It is the VBO ID, and this time it is GL15, which is the one I made a mistake before, dot GL gen buffers. Okay, and then we are going to go to the VBOs like we did with the VAOs, and we're going to say dot add, and here we want to add the VBO ID. So that's then, added to our list. GL15 dot GL bind buffer, because that's what we need to do now, and this is GL15 still. Get it right, 15. Yeah, don't make a mistake. Dot GL array buffer. There we go. And it's going to take in the VBO ID, so that is all correct. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take the float buffer. We're going to create a float buffer because we're taking in the float here, so we can create a float buffer. We call it buffer, and that is the store data in float buffer, and we're going to take data, and yep, you probably guessed that right. We will create that function in a second. So, well, after we created this function. So let's just import this. It's got a bit slow here. There we go. Import float buffer Java, and this store data in float buffer that we're going to create. We'll create that function soon. So gl15 dot gl buffer data. That's what we need now, and this is gl15 dot gl, and it's array buffer. That's going to then be the buffer, and this is going to be gl15 dot gl draw method. So this is static draw, which is that one. Okay, now we need to call the gl20 vertex attribute pointer. So gl20 dot gl vertex attribute. That's not the right one. Well, just do this again. Dot gl, yeah, vertex. I'll probably have to it's the attribute pointer, that one. Thank you very much. Got it finally. So the first one here is the attribute number, which is that one, and the second one is 3, and then it's gonna have to change this one to gl. Oh, let's get this right. gl11, and that is gl float. Yep, and then we've got false, and then we've got 0. Oh, didn't select that. 0, and this is 0. And I do just have a little issue here. Import gl11, so we'll just import gl11. So that issue is sorted. Good. Now what we need to do is gl15, and we need to bind the buffers. gl bind buffer, and it's gl15 because we're working with the buffers, and it's the gl array buffer. That's right, and we're going to put that into position 0. Yeah, it's because I wrote buffera, but it's just buffer. Okay, that's why it's complaining. Okay, so we are now going to just call the private void unbind the VAOs because we can. So this is private. This is the unbind VAOs we got up here. Private void unbind VAOs. There's just one line of code in here. If I just scroll down, it's gl30. And of course this is gl bind buffers. Sorry, we're not working with buffers, we're working with the array list. Okay, so dot, and it's gl bind vertex array, and it's 0. That'll unbind the vertex array. Okay, so now we are going to create this function here, which is store data in float buffer. So this is going to be private float buffer. I start with my buffers. Store data in float buffer, and there I wrote buffer again. Buffer. And this is going to take in our float array, which is the data. So here you can see that's basically what we're passing in. What we will do here is we'll just wait for this to load. It's change buffer. No, I want, it's because I don't have the L in there. Let's put the float buffer in there. Okay, it's gonna argue because it wants to have a return statement, which we will return the buffer in a minute. But first we need to do a float buffer. I'll call this a buffer. Why not? Equals buffer utils dot create float buffer, and this is data dot length. That's our buffer, and then we need to buffer dot put, and we need to put the data, and then we need to flip the buffer dot flip, so it can read the next one, and then we can return buffer. And there is a spelling mistake somewhere because I don't have the E in there. And now you can see that that is basically our loader done. So one last thing we need to create here in our renderer is going to be our renderer. So let's create a new class, and we call this not rep, renderer. Finish. So now we're going to create our renderer, and we're just going to crack on with that. And we're going to create a prepare void, public void prepare. So we prepare our renderer. For rendering GL, we're going to call GL11 dot GL clear, and it's asking us for a mask, which we'll put in GL11 dot, and this is GL color buffer bit, that one. And then we're going to do our color GL dot GL, what have I done wrong? GL, because I haven't got the number, 11 dot GL clear color, and in there we want our floats. I'm going to change the color so that when we try this we can see whether the color has actually changed, because remember that we are actually calling this method at the moment in our graphics display class. So that's our public prepare, because that'll just prepare our screen, and then we're going to call the void, so public renderer void render. That's better. And this is going to take in our model. Okay, the model that we've created, and then we're going to call GL30 dot GL bind vertex arrays, and this is going to take the model dot model dot, there we go, get VAO ID. Okay, and then we're going to do GL20 dot GL enable vertex array attribute, enable vertex attrib array. That's the one. It's a long number. It's going to be 0. Now I've got this suspicious A in the back. We'll just get rid of that. And then we go GL11 again. And this is GL draw arrays. GL draw arrays. And the first argument we want in is GL 11, oh, not exclamation marks, just 11 dot gl triangles. No, I just want triangles, so I'm just going to triangles, thank you. And then it's going to be 0, and then the last argument in there is going to be model dot get vertex count. Oh, no, not vertex yet, we've already got that. Get vertex count, which is that function that was created in the model. Then we're going to do gl20, and now this is going to be disable the vertex array attribute. Gl disable vertex array attribute, it's going to stay 0, and then it's going to be gl30. I almost thought I said dl30 then. And gl bind vertex array, and that's going to be 0 because that's also the one cleanup. So there we go. We have successfully created our loader, our model, and our renderer. And in our next video, we're going to test that. So I hope you got this far without having any errors in our renderer, because if you do, sort them out. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Okay? So yeah, I'm just going to save all of those. I'll probably just save all of them. And I'm going to say happy coding.